Um, so I've been trying to kind of identify what is this vein here of folks who are critiquing what I kind of see as the technology of bureaucracy, of how how power functions through institutions today. And so it's not this purely Marxist analysis because it's not looking at capital, it's not looking at economics, it's not looking at um, finances necessarily. What it's looking at is institutions like hospitals and schools and nonprofits and think tanks and government agencies that have been created. You think about things like child protective services, like a lot of these sort of institutions have only come into existence within the past 150 years. There was a huge push for the creation of the profession of the social worker by women in Chicago in like the late 1800s, early 1900s. So there's this new sort of institution that exercises political power in our society, and it's not a corporation, but it also isn't exactly how government used to function. So the way I feel like it was Foucault who really opened my eyes to this, because his analysis of the shift in the operation of power from an older model of the right over death to the right to life. And he goes into this in the appendix to the first volume of History of Sexuality. And that's like kind of an urtext for me. Like that's where it really clicked. And so that appendix, he talks about this shift in powers operation where it used to be, you think about the Lord in like say Braveheart, who has the power to come and take your bride, like the primum noctum sort of thing. Like he's this violent force from the outside who can sort of inflict catastrophe and death and violence upon the community sort of with impunity, and that's sort of the right of the Lord. And
Like
so
the point being, we literally live on his mercy.
exactly. That there's like the power is what governs kind of the doors of death. Power is what is allowed to inflict pain and torture and up to the point of death upon you, and you can't say anything. And that was how power operated. And there's a lot of, and part of what Michel Foucault is kind of bringing out in History of Sexuality is that all of this sort of hullabaloo about us being repressed is an attempt to pretend that we're still operating under that regime of power, and that sexuality is repressed so that we have to unleash it, that it's being controlled by the patriarchal father. We have to take away those rules, and we need to unleash these libidinal drives. And he's saying that story is pretending that things haven't changed. In fact, power works differently now, and the way power works differently is that it now operates in this model of the right to life. We've moved from a populace to a population where now power operates not at the limits of life, where death and pain and suffering are imposed, but it now operates imminently to life. And actually, the goal of power is to guide life towards flourishing. And so now it's actually death is sort of the strange point where power fails, and power is fixated on this point because it wants to understand how it can control this. So you move from a populace who needs to be controlled because they could rise up, because they might get too rowdy, they don't want, they might cheat, they're hiding things from the Lord, to a population who need to be turned into data. They need to be controlled and understood so that they can be helped, so that it is now the government's job to give you the best possible life rather than simply being that domain that kind of holds back the outer violence. And part of the reason the Lord could impose violence with impunity is partially because he was also the bulwark against a darker sort of edge of civilization where there was violence waiting. So, but now this new way of conceptualizing people is as kind of this unit that needs to be understood so that it can be optimized for flourishing. Um, yeah, we could go into a lot. I don't know if you want me to keep talking or not, but that shift, this is what like this shift to the right of life for of how power operates now is kind of what I take Foucault to mean by biopolitics. And I think that once you start to see this tendency in the government of and not just the government, but sort of quasi public entities and institutions that have sprung up to understand and serve these needs, you begin to start seeing the effects and this logic everywhere.